Hi, and welcome to my first podcast, my first episode with Harshan. He is our guest today, and I'm so honored to have you as my first guest, Harshan. Welcome.
Thank you very much for me being here. I'm
Um,
sure me being your sibling didn't have anything to do with being a
I
podcast.
think if I can recall, like a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I told you that I wanted to start a podcast and a YouTube channel, and the main focus was mentorship, careership, all of those aspects. Um, and 4 years have gone by. I've started doing some things on YouTube, but haven't gotten to starting the podcast yet. So thanks for being here. Today, we're going to kick off predominantly with your actuary career and how you got into that and how it's going, etc. So, I just wanted to start off with a brief overview of what subjects you did at school in order to get into university.
So I chose physics, accounting, and IT. I think the prerequisites for actuarial is just to have a high maths mark, a 7, I think, and I don't think they fussy about your subjects. So um, I think the overall APS or whatever it's called now matters. But I don't think any subject will hinder you if you can do additional mathematics courses. That's to your benefit. Um, Physics helps with the first principles thinking. Accounting helped because actuaries work typically in a financial environment. And IT helped as well because we work a lot with data, and a lot of the models that you build will be built in software. And so those three subjects really, I think, catapulted me um, quite nicely into the university. Of course, whatever you covered in university, you would have covered it. Um, if you didn't cover it at school, you would cover it in university. So it doesn't hurt you in any way. But I can recommend those three subjects for anyone doing actuarial. But I think just having that mathematics background, I think, is quite useful.
Thanks so much for that. And how did you experience studying at university? How did you get yourself to study, to focus in class, to ensure that your notes were up to date and your lectures were up to date?
I think university is a test of discipline because there's nobody following up on you. I think if there's a period of my life where I was totally free, it would be university. I think at school you have a teacher with a ruler behind you, and you have your parents. Um, and when you're at work as well, you have a boss and you have team members, who are always checking up on you. So in a way, it's kind of like school. But at university, that's one time in your career where you really need to be self-disciplined. Um, for me, I just enjoyed the subjects and I enjoyed doing it. So that's the first step, is that you must enjoy what you do. And it fit my personality very well. So it was quite mathematical, finance driven, lots of statistics and economics. And it was almost a perfect fit. Um, that being said, I think you have to treat it as a marathon, not as a sprint. So as much as you study hard and work hard, you also need to take breaks and just focus on the long picture. It's not just four
Definitely.
years of studying, it's also another maybe 2 or 3 years after that when you're also working. And so it's a long stretch of just continuous studying, hitting the books. Um, for me, I was also fortunate to have a good group of friends who were quite diligent. And when I was less diligent, they would keep me on my toes and reminded me of any tests and things that are coming up. So having a good support structure at home and also at university was helpful in completing that university degree.
So you've talked about continuing studying after you were done with university. Talk us through what it actually entails in terms of, because to my knowledge and understanding, and having you as my sibling who's passed all the actuarial exams, what is that journey like? Are you able to do it while you're studying during your university? Are you able to only do it after you've found a job or some sort, like how does it work?
So most universities, if you do an actuarial program in South Africa, they offer what they call exemptions. So that means that you are exempt from writing exams from the Actuarial Society of South Africa or perhaps the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries in the UK. And for that, you would have had to complete the degree and have once you complete it, and also while you're writing the subjects and you get a certain minimum for the exam, that doesn't necessarily mean passing the course. It means that you perhaps get a 65 or 70 or whatever the hurdle is for that exam. You meet the exemption, you get exemption for that subject. And so out of the, I'm not even sure, 12, 13 exams that there are, a lot of universities, including University of Pretoria, where I went to, offer uh, exemptions for 11 up to 12 of these exams. And once you, if you focus during your university career, the number of exams that you have to tackle post that is far fewer. And you can, uh, you can almost think of it as, because when you're working, you obviously have limited time. You have a full-time job and focusing is very difficult. So you can almost, when you have a full-time studying career, you can focus on getting those exemptions as far as you can. Um, and so that's how it works. And the rest of them you need to complete after university.
Thanks for that. Now, and I understand that you've also completed your CFA. Can you explain to myself and the audience what a CFA is and what that journey is like and what it actually is about?
Okay, so maybe I can make a contrast to actuarial and CFA, if that's something the audience would be interested
Yes,
in.
sure.
The actual, okay, cool. So actuarial is more focused on uh, a rigorous statistical mathematical backing. And typically, the skills applied that are learned in actuarial can be applied in a rigorous finance environment. So that includes more insurance companies uh, where you modeling claim outgo premium income, and you have a bit of economics, you have a bit of statistics, um, a bit of accounting and financial reporting, and you're consolidating all of that into into a single framework. And that's typically applied at insurance companies, at banks, in pension funds, um, healthcare providers, whether that's medical aid or health insurance, as they have in the United States. Um, and I think in contra, it more focuses on a liability type framework. So it's about measuring and modeling future unknowns and taking those unknowns, applying a rigorous framework and making it known or tangible and applying a number to it. So that's actuarial in a nutshell. Um, and there's a famous actuary, Frank Reddington, who says an actuary who's just an actuary is not an actuary. So the career typically spans a lot, and you'll find actuaries working in totally different fields to what you'd expect. Contrast that to a CFA. A CFA is predominantly found in the asset space. So they would typically be found in asset managers. So CFAs are typically portfolio managers, where whether they are fixed income, so they're working with bonds and money market instruments or credit instruments, or equity type or private equity. So they work more in the investment space and are more found in that space. So it's almost like actuaries are liability focused and CFAs are asset focused. That being said, there's no rules that say you cannot cross over from one to the other. You typically find actuaries who work at asset managers. You won't necessarily find asset managers that work in actuarial roles. Um, but I think the complete framework is that they do work together in many instances.
Thanks for the explanation. I think even I didn't know the contrast between the two, so thank you for that. In terms of career growth, would you say that the actuary path is a path that someone who, for instance, is in matric currently or has just begun their actuary journey, would you say that it's a good career path to have from a growth perspective?
I think so, absolutely at the moment. I think over history of time, if you plot the famous careers per se, it's typically been different doctors or lawyers or
Yes,
and I think every
engineers,
career goes through favor. Sorry,
engineers, the
you'd agree.
typical,
Engineers,
yeah.
exactly. And I think every career goes through a phase of demand where there's a lot of growth for certain in a certain country perhaps, and the demand for actuaries is there. I think the demand for actuaries in South Africa has definitely been there over the last few years, and I think it is definitely a career you can grow in. Um, Whether that will be the same 30 years from now, we'll have to see how much of AI takes our role. But I think that the nature of an actuary is that it's not a singular role, it's multidisciplinary. And I think that and there's also a lot of discretion involved. And I think that type of thinking is very difficult to replicate by a computer. But I think it can be assisted by models. But the 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 amount you learn and the skills you learn to become an actuary can be transferred to many other careers. There are people who study actuarial science, and then they go into computer science, or they um, become consultants because they just have this um, thinking that's very different. And yes, so to answer your question, yes, there is growth, and I would recommend it to someone at this point in time.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. So, before we end off our very first podcast, I'd like you to quickly just give an audience, I'm going to do like a random question for you. What advice would you give to your younger self while you were studying actuary?
What advice? Ooh, this is a hard one. um, well, I can answer the question, but then you also have to give your opinion.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. I would say that as much as the learnings are important, the content of your material, it's also to learn principles and to get those principles embedded into your thinking and your framework. Um, because you will quickly forget what you learned at university and what you studied. But if you have a principled framework and way of thinking, you can apply that throughout your work and your life and your career. I think that is more valuable than actually knowing the content 100%.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
okay.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
very good insight. Because most often to
ex-
not, work is also very different, or implementation is very different from your theory or what you actually study as well.
exactly. Exactly. What you study may or may not be used. You might use 5% of it, you might use 10% of it. But if you can have a principle for how you tackle and learn lifelong, if you start a new job or a new role, or you doing something for the first time, relearning, having a principled framework of how you build up in that space, I think is very, very powerful. And I think also making memories. If I think back of university days and you're studying and you're just trying to get through, but to make memories and have a good time with your friends and build relationships, I think that's also key because more often than not, life is about relationships and building on those. And the people you find that you build on, you'll often find them later down in your career. So it's great that you can build relationships over that time. So yes, that's my advice to my younger self. It's build a principled framework of thinking and build relationships. And now you can tell me yours.
Thanks. So I think mine is a bit different given the career that I'm in. I've had to do articles during my career, and I've also had to do board exams, the same as you, and I've had to be admitted as an attorney before I could practice. My advice, though, would be that your training wheels once you get out from university still has to be on for a little while. And I think that's why in the legal field it's so important to do your articles because you still have those training wheels on before you actually go out and practice law. But I think one thing or one piece of advice I would give to my younger self is to also have a balanced lifestyle. So to try and prioritize health and well-being along with, like you mentioned, the relationship building, the making memories, the studying. Um, I wish that I had already started focusing on my fitness, um, lifestyle, healthy eating, etc. So I would have loved to incorporate that from a young age, so that it's not so difficult when you do start working as well. So that's the advice I would give to my younger self.
That's some good advice. The training wheels should always be on in some instance, and especially when you just out of university, then there's no harm in learning. And I think continuous learning, as you mentioned, is key.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for being the first guest on this podcast. All the best in your career and your career journey. May it be a fruitful one, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon further.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank
We
you.
should interview you next.
Definitely. Okay,
Cool.
bye.
Bye.